So with the Artemis missions coming up, I wanted to talk about why it has taken us so long to get back to the moon. Now, there's several reasons, but the first one is funding. This is a plot of NASA's funding as a percent of the total federal budget. Can you guess what's going on over here? This was the 60s when the Apollo program was happening. Do you see how much more money NASA was getting then compared to now? The push for space travel and the funding that NASA received in the 60s was a very unique situation, driven largely by international competition and the space race. Since we got to the moon first, there hasn't been as much of a government push to go back. And it is expensive to get to the moon. It requires a lot of resources. So that's kind of the big reason why it's taken so long, but the other reason is technology. This was the rocket that got us to the moon during the Apollo programs. This is Saturn V, and it is a really, really powerful rocket. But because the entire Apollo program was just based around getting to the moon as soon as possible, designing these sort of systems with an eye towards reuse and repurpose was not really something on anybody's mind. None of this architecture was meant to be reused. None of this rocket came back down. It all landed in the ocean. The rockets were retired, the architecture was decommissioned. We just don't have this around to use anymore. Although not that we necessarily would want to, because believe it or not, technology has changed a ton since the 60s. Here's a recreation of mission control during the Apollo landings, and here's what NASA's mission control looks like now. Computers and the technology that we use is just entirely different. And that's reflected in the rockets and orbiters. This is the Space Launch System, or SLS, that is now being used for the Artemis missions. It can produce 15% more thrust than the Saturn V rockets could. The spacecraft that the actual astronauts will be in are completely different too. The Apollo spacecraft just had one computer. The ones for the Artemis missions, which we call the Orion spacecraft, have 4 computers for redundancy. Each one of those computers is 20,000 times faster than an Apollo computer, and it has 128,000 times more memory. So between the sharp loss in federal funding, the fact that none of the Apollo things were designed to be reused or continued into the future, and the fact that technology has just changed so much, we really do kind of have to start from scratch with any big space program to the moon.